Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a source, could be anything really, an article, notes, research.
That's something you've brought us?
Exactly, and we just drill down, try to pull out the key insights, the main points, so you can get up to speed quickly.
It's all about cutting through
Yeah.
noise, yeah.
Yeah,
Getting straight to the heart of what that specific piece of material is arguing or presenting.
that's the plan. So today we're digging into this document. It's titled Hebrew Bible Spiritual Beings, Elohim, Satan, and Shedim.
Okay.
And our goal here isn't, some huge theological debate. We're focusing only on what this specific document says about the hierarchy, the roles, the implications of terms like Elohim, Eloah, Elion, Satan, and Shedim.
Right. And we should probably note, this document, it definitely has its own viewpoint. It's structured like a biblical study. It even includes prayers, talks about spiritual warfare.
Mm.
So our job is just to understand and explain the content that's in this text. We're looking at what it says,
Yep.
not necessarily saying this is the final word or agreeing with its specific theology.
Absolutely. Just unpacking the source itself. And honestly, what it presents about some of these terms, like Elohim or Satan, it might be a bit different from what you expect. It could offer a surprising angle based on these old texts.
It definitely lays out a specific framework. So where does it start? It introduces the main terms right off the bat. Elohim, Eloah, Elion, Satan, and Shedim.
Okay.
And it frames these from the get-go as representing what it calls a broad spiritual hierarchy in the Hebrew Bible.
A hierarchy. Okay, so let's start with maybe the biggest one, Elohim. We usually just translate that as God, singular. But this document seems to focus on how it's used. What's the key thing it points out?
Well, yeah, it acknowledges the singular use for God,
Yeah.
Yahweh.
Yeah.
But the really crucial point the source makes is that the term Elohim is also used in the plural, referring to other spiritual beings.
Other beings. And it brings up verses to back that up, right? Like Genesis 1.1, Elohim created. That's clearly singular God.
Right, the classic example.
But then it contrasts that with Psalm 82.1, which says something like, Elohim stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the Elohim. That second Elohim there, that's plural, right?
Exactly. That's where the source sees clear evidence for a plural meaning, referring to other beings in God's counsel. And it also mentions Exodus 20.3, you shall have no other Elohim before me.
Oh, right. Other gods, plural.
Again, plural. The source even paints this picture like a divine courtroom with Yahweh as the judge over this council of lesser Elohim. That's how it interprets Psalm 82 especially.
Okay.
So the main idea from this source document is that Elohim isn't just a name. It can function more like a category for spiritual beings.
That feels really central to its whole argument. Okay, it also mentions Eloah. How's that different from Elohim, according to this source?
The source presents Elo pretty simply as the singular form of Elohim. It notes you see it more often in like poetry or wisdom books.
Ah, so context matters. It gives examples like Job 3.4, let not Eloah regard it, or Deuteronomy 32.15, forsook Eloah who made him, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. The source just illustrates it as a more maybe personal or reverent way to refer to God, singular within those specific literary styles. So basically the singular counterpart to Elohim.
Interesting. Okay, so different forms for different contexts. What about El Elyon? That's another term it tackles. How does that fit in?
Elyon, that means God Most High. And the document uses this one specifically to hammer home God's absolute sovereignty, his position above everyone else in this spiritual landscape it's describing.
Right, like in Genesis 14, Melchizedek calls God El Elyon, possessor of heaven and earth. That sounds pretty supreme.
Precisely. And the source really leans on Deuteronomy 32.50, when the Most High divided the nations.
Oh, yeah, where it says Yahweh's portion is his people.
Exactly. The source uses that to show God's ultimate authority, even in how nations or maybe spiritual jurisdictions were assigned. So El Elyon really highlights that top-tier status for God in this document's view.
Okay, got it. Now, the next one, Satan. This is where the source might challenge some common ideas, right? What's the core meaning it gives, and what's the big initial point it makes?
Yeah, this is a key part of the document's analysis. It defines the Hebrew word Satan as meaning adversary or accuser. But the critical insight, the thing it really emphasizes, is that originally this was more of a role or a title.
A role, not a name.
Not initially, according to this source. It wasn't necessarily a specific personal name for, the ultimate evil being right away.
Wow, okay. That distinction seems huge. How does it use passages like Job or Zechariah to argue for that role interpretation?
Well, it points straight to Job 1 and 2, where you have the accuser, Ha-Satan in Hebrew, with the article Dethurah showing up among the sons of God to challenge Job.
Right, acting like a prosecuting attorney almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Mhm.
And similarly, in Zechariah 3, you see Ha-Satan standing there to accuse the high priest Joshua. Again, it's presented as someone performing an adversarial function within the heavenly court.
And the source gives other examples too, doesn't it? Outside those big stories. Like in Numbers, where an angel acts as a Satan to Balaam.
Exactly. Numbers 22.22, the angel is an adversary. Or Psalm 109.6, which talks about letting an accuser, a Satan, stand against someone. The document explicitly says Ha-Satan, the accuser, suggests a role or title.
Okay.
So the argument in this source is that the term started out describing a function, and then crucially, it notes that according to this document's reading, it's only later that Satan develops into the proper name for a specific cosmic enemy of God.
That evolution is fascinating as the source lays it out. Okay, let's keep going. Shedim. What does the source say about these?
Shedim. The source defines these pretty directly as demons, malevolent spirits, so clearly negative entities.
Right, and it links them to verses like Deuteronomy 32.17. They sacrifice to Shedim, not to Eloah.
And Psalm 106.37, they sacrifice their sons and daughters to the Shedim.
Yeah, grim stuff.
Definitely. And based on those verses, the source's illustration is that these Shedim are like the hidden demonic entities behind idolatry and human sacrifice. It connects them directly to those forbidden pagan practices, real harmful forces.
Okay, so we've got these different terms: Elohim, Eloah, El Elyon, Satan, Shedim. And the source defines them in specific ways. How does it then weave them into that spiritual hierarchy it mentioned? It actually ranks them, right, in a table.
It does, yeah. It lays out a kind of ranking from 1 to 7.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, rank 1, the very top, is God Most High, El Elyon, the Supreme Sovereign.
Makes sense, given the definition. Who's rank 2?
Rank 2 is Yahweh, or Eloah, or Elohim, when used singularly for God, described as the creator, the judge, the one who makes covenants, cites Genesis 1, Job 3.
Okay, and then below God, rank 3.
Rank 3 is what it calls the divine council. The B'nai Elohim, or Elohim used plurally. These are created spirits acting as administrators under Yahweh.
Ah, so this connects back to Psalm 82 again. The Elohim God judges among.
Precisely. That's how the source sees it. These are created beings in God's administration. It also lists Job 38 and 1 Kings 22 as examples of this council.
Okay, so a council of created beings. Then where does Satan fit in this ranking?
Satan, or Ha-Satan, is placed at rank 4, identified as a created spirit, fulfilling that accuser-adversary role. It references Job and Zechariah again here.
Interesting. Below the main council, but still quite high up in this structure.
That fits the source's idea of him initially being part of that council, perhaps. Now, rank 5 is interesting. It's listed as disembodied spirits.
Human spirits.
Yeah, human spirits, or spirits of the dead. The key example given is 1 Samuel 28. You know, the story of the medium calling up Samuel's spirit.
Right, right. So even human spirits have a place in this spiritual landscape described by the source. What about the lower ranks?
Rank 6 is the demons, the Shedim we just talked about, malevolent spirits who receive sacrifices deceive. Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 106, cited again.
Tied firmly to idolatry.
Exactly. And then rank 7, the lowest rank of this table, is false gods, using the term Elohim Ekrim. These are defined as idols, demonic beings, and essentially counterfeits of the true God. Cites Exodus 20, the first commandment, and Jeremiah 10 on the emptiness of idols.
Okay, so it ranks them, but it also seems to group them into bigger categories, doesn't it? How does that work?
Yeah, it summarizes them into 4 main buckets, basically. First, you have the supreme being. That's Elyon, Yahweh, Elohim, used singularly. Uncreated, sovereign creator. Isaiah 6 is given as an example there.
Got it. The unique top tier. Next.
Second is the heavenly council, the B'nai Elohim, or holy ones. These are the created administrators, loyal spirits. The example is 1 Kings 22, where the prophet Micaiah sees Yahweh on his throne with the host of heaven around him.
Okay, the administrative staff, so to speak, and the opposition.
That's the third category, opposing spirits. This is where it groups Satan, described now as the accuser-turned-rebel, along with the Shedim, the demonic beings, and the Elohim Makarim, the false god idols. Deuteronomy 32 comes up again, linking these forces to leading people away from Yahweh.
And the last category connects back to rank 5.
Exactly. The fourth category is disembodied human spirits, citing 1 Samuel 28 again, where Samuel's spirit is contextually called an Elohim coming up from the earth.
Okay, wow. So we've gone through the terms, the source's definitions, its hierarchy, its categories. So pulling it all together, What are the main theological points the document itself really emphasizes? What are the big takeaways it wants you to get from this, well, this quite complex picture?
It really hammers home a few key things. First, that idea that Elohim is often a category word for spiritual beings. It's not always just a name for Yahweh. That's fundamental to its whole interpretation.
Yeah, that seems to underpin everything else.
It really does. Second, it stresses that El Elyon is used to specifically highlight God's total supremacy over all these other beings. Third, it suggests the divine council idea helps picture Yahweh's rule, sort of like a king with his court, but on a cosmic scale involving these spiritual agents.
And the point about Satan's development.
Right. It underlines its argument that Satan started as a role the accuser, and then, over time in the tradition, evolved into a distinct personal adversary figure. And finally, it insists that the Shedim and the Elohim Akarim, the false gods, aren't just metaphors in the text. They represent real spiritual forces involved in idolatry.
So the source wraps up by painting this picture of a really layered spiritual reality.
Pretty much. It concludes saying that, according to its reading of the Hebrew Bible, you've got this cosmos where God alone is eternal and uncreated, and he rules over all these different kinds of spiritual beings, loyal ones, adversarial ones, and these darker, malevolent forces. Understanding this, the source suggests, gives a richer view of God's sovereignty and spiritual conflict, all within its specific theological framework, of course.
And true to its style, the document itself ends with a prayer, and even suggests some further reading for folks interested in this perspective.
That's right. It lists authors like Michael Heiser, John Walton, Meredith Kline suggests their books, like The Unseen Realm, The Lost World of Genesis 1, Images of the Spirit. So resources mentioned within the source document for exploring his viewpoint further.
Okay, well, that was definitely a deep dive into this one document's take on spiritual beings in the Hebrew Bible. We've unpacked its specific definitions, its hierarchy, the theological conclusions it draws about Elohim, El Elyon, Satan, Shedim.
And we've really tried to stick just to understanding what this specific source argues and presents, hopefully giving you a clear snapshot of its particular view on a pretty complex subject.
Exactly. So here's something to maybe mull over, thinking about what this source presented. If we take its argument seriously, that Elohim can be a broader category for spiritual beings, and that Satan perhaps began as a job title, a role, what does that kind of layered view, as described in this text and interpreted by this source, make you reconsider about how we understand roles, identity, and maybe even conflict in these ancient stories?
It definitely makes you think about how language functions in those texts and how meanings might shift or have different nuances depending on context.
Always something to chew on. Well, bring us your sources and we'll keep digging. Until next time.